Snow drifted lazily from the gray sky, blanketing the wide boulevards of central Moscow in white silence. It was mid-January, and the air bit with a cold that clung to the skin like glass. People hurried along Tverskaya Street in heavy coats and scarves, boots crunching through the ice, eyes down, minds elsewhere. Natalia Petrovna adjusted her camera lens with gloved fingers, trying to keep it from fogging. She had been assigned a simple human interest story by her editor at Moskovskaya Vesti, a small but growing news outlet. How are the homeless surviving the winter? It was meant to be a filler piece. Nothing more. But Natalia was not one to skim the surface. She wanted a story with soul. Down the stairs of the Arbitskaya metro station, warmth and movement returned. The underground world was alive. Commuters brushed past her. Music spilled from cheap headphones, and beggars whispered for coins with outstretched hands. Then she saw him. Tucked in the far corner of the marble station, half covered by a tattered blanket and resting on a flattened cardboard box, was a boy. No older than 20, his face was too clean for someone used to the street. His hair, a soft brown mess, curled beneath a woolen cap. His eyes, despite the dim lighting, were sharp, alert. She hesitated, then approached slowly. "Excuse me," she said gently, crouching beside him. The boy didn't flinch, just turned his head and stared. "My name's Natalia. I'm a journalist. Can I ask you something?" "No pictures," he said, his Russian sharp but calm. "I can agree to that. Just your words." He hesitated, then nodded once. "What's your name?" "Alexei," he replied. "Alexei Morozov." The surname struck her. Morozov? That was not a common name. Not for someone in rags beneath a metro station. Morozov. Are you related to? "Yes," he interrupted. "But I'd rather not talk about them." Natalia's instincts kicked in. There was more here than she'd expected. This wasn't just a homeless boy. This was a name with weight, with legacy. A story hidden under layers of frost. "What happened, Alexei?" He looked away, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "I lost everything. But not in the way people think. I didn't lose a job or money. I lost people." Natalia didn't push. Not yet. She reached into her coat and handed him a thermos. Hot tea. No strings attached. He accepted it with a nod, holding the cup close to his face, as if it were a memory from a better time. She sat beside him in silence for a while, listening to the sound of trains passing behind them. This was more than just a profile on the homeless. It was a crack in the ice, and behind it, something far more complicated. Natalia spent the entire night replaying the conversation in her head. She sat by her window, watching the snow continue to fall over Moscow's rooftops, the dim glow of street lamps catching flakes as they danced. The name Morozov lingered in her thoughts like an echo. It was not a name to be taken lightly. The Morozov family were once giants in Moscow's industrial elite, founders of a successful textile conglomerate and benefactors to various art institutions. She remembered reading about them in university, in business case studies and society pages alike. But they had faded in recent years, quietly retreating from the public eye. What could have driven a Morozov heir to the streets? The next morning, Natalia returned to Arbitskaya station. Alexei was still there, bundled in the same blanket, sipping from a cup someone else had likely handed him. "I brought food," she said, showing a paper bag of pierogi. He glanced up. "You came back. I told you. I'm not here to write what people already know." He took the bag, but said nothing for a while. Then, with a tone that was more memory than voice, he muttered, "They'll be furious if they know I spoke to you." "Your family?" He nodded. "Are they looking for you?" "No," he said flatly. "And they never will." Natalia frowned. "But why? You're not an addict. You don't look like someone who gave up." "I didn't give up," Alexei said coldly. "They gave up on me." His words lingered, bitter in the cold air. "My father," he continued, voice steady but tight, "is Anton Morozov. You might remember his face from the newspapers. He used to chair the Morozov group. My mother, Yelena, was an opera singer. Beautiful. Cold as marble. To them, image was everything. They loved what I represented, not who I was. He took a deep breath, then looked at her as if daring her to believe him. I was groomed to take over. Private schools, tutors, silence at dinner tables. It didn't matter if I was unhappy, only that I played the part. When I was 15, I told them something that didn't fit their script. Natalia stayed still. Every instinct screamed at her not to interrupt. I told them I wanted to study music, not economics. And I told them I was gay. Alexei's jaw tensed. His eyes flicked to the ground. They cut me off. Not financially. Not right away. But emotionally. Then the distance grew. Conversations became instructions. Hugs became handshakes. My room became a cage. He looked up again. So I left. Natalia barely breathed. Her throat tightened. You walked away from all of that? I ran, he corrected. And I've been running ever since. The sound of a train roared in the distance, stirring the stale underground air. I thought maybe if I disappeared, someone would come looking. But they didn't. They let me vanish. Because in their world, it's better to lose a son than admit you raised one who doesn't fit. Natalia closed her notebook slowly. This was no ordinary story. This was a confession, wrapped in frost and pride. And something told her this was only the beginning. Natalia could not shake the weight of Alexei's words. As she rode the metro back to her flat that evening, the train rattled through the tunnels like a pulse beneath the city. The grandeur of Moscow, the gilded domes, the harsh statues of the past, the wide boulevards, felt hollow now. All that splendor built upon silence, obedience, image. She spent hours digging. Archives. News clippings. Corporate reports. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as the glow of her laptop bathed the room in blue light. There he was, Alexei Morozov, in younger years, in tailored suits at charity galas beside his poised parents. He had vanished from the public record sometime after his 16th birthday. The family offered no public statement. The narrative was tightly controlled. But something else caught her eye, a financial discrepancy. There had been a quiet shift in the Morozov group's leadership not long after Alexei disappeared. Anton Morozov had handed the reins to a distant cousin, not his only son. That in itself was strange. Even in private companies, bloodlines mattered. And then there was a whisper, buried deep in the financials, an asset write-off, vaguely described. A property in Zvenigorod, on the outskirts of Moscow. Closed off. Classified for internal reasons. Natalia tapped her pen against the desk. She had a feeling that whatever had happened to Alexei did not end at rejection. It reeked of concealment. The next morning, she returned to Arbitskaya. Alexei was there, sharpening a stick with a pocket knife, muttering a melody under his breath. I did some reading, she said carefully. Your father passed the company to a cousin. Not to you. That's unusual, isn't it? Alexei snorted without looking up. They'd rather it go to someone with the right values. But something doesn't make sense. A property in Zvenigorod, written off in their books. What happened there? His hands froze mid-carve. Silence stretched between them. I thought no one would ever dig that deep, he said at last, voice low. I'm not like the others, remember? Alexei sighed. That place. I never planned to talk about it. Not to anyone. Natalia remained quiet, offering space. I was 16. After I told them the truth, there were arguments. Screaming matches. One night, my father drove me to the dacha outside Zvenigorod. He said I was going to heal. That I needed time away from the city, from my distractions. His jaw tightened. But it wasn't healing. It was isolation. They locked me in. Took my phone. Said it was for my own good. That I was sick. Natalia's heart dropped. They institutionalized you. No papers. No official record. Just guards, doctors on their payroll, and months of trying to fix me. Alexei looked up, eyes haunted. They tried to reprogram me. With threats. With sermons. With medication. When I fought back, they sedated me. When I cried, they told me it was weakness. When I refused to speak, They kept me alone for days. The tunnel wind howled as another train sped past. One night, I escaped. It took weeks to get far enough that no one would find me. I've been underground since. Natalia's voice wavered. Why didn't you go to the police? They own the police. Or enough of them to make a complaint vanish. She could hardly breathe. Everything in her told her to rage, to act, to write the headline now. But she held it in. Let me tell your story, she whispered. Alexei looked at her, really looked, as though seeing her not as a journalist, but as someone who might just hold a torch to his darkness. And for the first time, he gave a small nod. 2 days later, they left the city together. Natalia had borrowed her colleague's battered old Lada. It coughed and wheezed as it rolled through the outskirts of Moscow, past industrial zones, silent woods, and broken road signs. Alexei sat in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the passing birch trees like they might suddenly leap to life. Neither spoke much. The silence between them was heavy, not uncomfortable, a silence of knowing. They reached the outskirts of Zvenigorod just after midday. The village was quiet, its charm faded under gray skies. A narrow, mud-caked path led off the main road, marked only by a rusted gate barely hanging on its hinges. This is it, Alexei said softly. Natalia pulled over. Her heartbeat quickened as they stepped out of the car. The dacha loomed behind a thicket of dead trees. It was large, the kind of estate a powerful man would use to entertain oligarchs and ministers, but there was nothing inviting about it. The windows were boarded, the garden overgrown, and a chill hung in the air despite the spring breeze. They approached slowly, boots crunching on gravel and rotting leaves. Alexei pulled a folded paper from his coat, a copy of the floor plan he had drawn from memory. Follow me. I remember every room. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the ghost of antiseptic. The walls bore faded remnants of expensive wallpaper, peeling at the corners. A narrow corridor stretched ahead, lit dimly by streaks of light slipping through broken shutters. Alexei's hand trailed along the walls as he walked. He stopped by a locked door and stared at it. This room, he whispered. This was where they kept me. Natalia felt her breath catch. He knelt, picking at the old lock with a piece of wire. After a few tense minutes, the door creaked open. The room was bare. The walls were lined with scratches, long, furious, desperate. A rusted metal bed frame sat in the corner, and a bolt remained fixed to the floor where a chain must have once been. Natalia stepped inside, feeling the echo of screams that had long since died. Why bring me here? She asked gently. Alexei looked away. Because I need to see it, to face it, and maybe so will the world. In a small cupboard beside the bed, they found something unexpected, a stack of notebooks, dusty and brittle. Natalia flipped one open. Handwritten pages, full of Alexei's thoughts. Doodles. Memories. Please. They never checked, he said quietly. I hid them under the floorboards. They never knew I was still writing. Natalia carefully placed the notebooks in her satchel. These were more than proof, they were a soul preserved. They moved through the house, Alexei guiding her to what he called the therapy room. There, she found leather restraints on a reclining chair, faded posters of smiling families on the walls, and drawers filled with discarded pill bottles. Natalia took photographs discreetly, careful not to speak. The truth didn't need embellishment. It screamed from every corner. But just as they were about to leave, they heard a sound. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Someone was in the house. Alexei grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a curtain. He whispered, "No one should be here. It's been abandoned for years." They held their breath as the footsteps drew closer. The figure passed by the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, in a dark coat. Natalia's skin went cold. The man paused, sniffing the air like an animal. Then he spoke, low and sharp in Russian. "Whoever you are, I'll find you." Alexei's grip tightened. "That's Kirill," he whispered. "He was my father's enforcer. If he's here, they know." Natalia's pulse thundered in her ears. She had enough for an exposé, enough for 10. But now they had to survive getting it out. They waited until the footsteps faded. Then, without a word, they slipped out through the back, into the forest, running until their lungs burned, and the dacha was just a dark memory behind them. The return to Moscow was quiet. They drove without music, without speaking, the weight of what they had seen clinging to them like wet clothes. Natalia's flat in Arbat now felt less like home and more like a potential crime scene. She locked the door behind them, double-bolted it, and pulled the curtains tight. Alexei sat on the edge of her sofa, staring blankly. His body was present, but something in him had retreated. She understood. Trauma did not need to announce itself to make noise. She transferred the photographs and scans of his journals onto 2 encrypted drives, one to keep, one to hide. Then she began writing. Every word had to be precise, cautious, but powerful enough to cut through the fog of denial that hovered over Russian society. "I need a source to corroborate your story," she finally said. "Someone inside." Alexei didn't look at her. "There is one. Yelena Arsenyeva. She used to work in the Ministry of Health. She managed the licensing for the center. If anyone knows what happened behind the scenes, it's her." Natalia looked up sharply. "Where is she now?" "She disappeared," he said. "Or so the papers claimed. But I heard whispers last year that she was seen near Taganka, that she had gone underground." Natalia hesitated. "Taganka is crawling with agents." Alexei nodded. "So we go carefully." They spent the next day asking questions through back channels. Natalia met an old contact, a war photographer turned informant, in a crumbling cafe near Chisty Prudy. He wore 2 scarves, spoke in riddles, and wouldn't touch the tea. "She's not hiding," he muttered. "She's just not ready. You'll find her at the ballet theater. Back row. Wednesday nights." Natalia pressed a folded note into his hand. "If we get caught, this never happened." He laughed bitterly. "If you get caught, it won't matter." That Wednesday, dressed like a retired couple trying to relive their youth, Natalia and Alexei entered the Stanislavsky Theater. The scent of old velvet and dust hung in the air. The performance, Giselle, was already in progress. They slipped into the back row. She sat 3 seats from them. Older than Alexei remembered, her hair streaked with gray, her hands gloved even in the heat. Yelena watched the stage, unmoving, until the act ended. Then she turned to them without expression. "I hoped I'd never see you again, Alexei." Her voice was low, controlled. "I didn't come for comfort," he replied. "I came for truth." She sighed, and for a moment, Natalia saw the burden of years crash down behind her eyes. She nodded toward the fire exit. They followed her into the alley behind the theater. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. "They're still watching me. Always." "But you know what happened," Natalia said. "We have the journals. The house. The photos." Yelena looked at her. "You don't have the records. The invoices. The files that prove who paid for what and when. Those are still locked up in the ministry archives." Alexei's voice sharpened. "Then help us get them." She stared at him. "I helped your father build that place. I signed off on the medications, the restraints, the treatments. I did it because I believed in it. Because I thought we were saving the children from themselves." Natalia's heart sank. "And now?" "Now I know it was a lie," Yelena whispered. "But if I give you what you need, they will kill me." Natalia reached into her bag and handed over the flash drive. "Then make your death mean something." Yelena took the drive, stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it into her coat. "I'll send word," she said. "But if I don't bury it all, or it'll bury you." She slipped into the shadows before they could say another word. Alexei exhaled deeply, and for a moment, Natalia could feel how fragile the line was between truth and oblivion. The web was vast, the players powerful, but the story had begun. 3 weeks passed without a word. Natalia checked the burner phone every morning, her hands trembling slightly each time she unlocked the screen. Nothing. No missed calls, no cryptic texts. Just silence. Alexei had moved into a hostel in Sokolniki under a false name. Every few days he left town and returned by a different route. Paranoia had become second nature. Then, one night, Just as snow began to fall over the city, a single text appeared on the encrypted app.
Now.
Lubyanka. Archive 3. Sublevel. Use code. Krasnaya. Natalia stared at it, her heart thudding in her throat. She didn't know if it had come from Yelena or from someone using her name to set a trap. But the clock was ticking. She met Alexei outside the old Lubyanka building an hour before midnight. The square was mostly empty, the wind cutting through their coats like knives. "She's alive," she said, her voice low. "Or someone wants us to think she is." Alexei nodded. "Either way, we find out." They entered through the service door, as instructed. The guard on duty didn't look up from his monitor. Natalia slid a folded paper across the desk, an old ministry authorization letter with a forged seal and the code Yelena had provided. The guard hesitated, then buzzed them in. They walked through concrete corridors lined with files older than the regime itself. Past iron doors, past flickering lights. When they reached the archive marked 3, Natalia paused. The keypad glowed red. She typed in the code. KRSNAY. A click. Then the door creaked open. Inside was darkness. The scent of mold and rust. Rows of cabinets stretched into the gloom. Natalia switched on her torch and scanned the tags. Most were marked with dull bureaucratic labels. Medical records, juvenile reform 2004 to 2010, licensing requests, budget allocations. Alexei moved like a man hunting ghosts. He opened drawers one by one, flipping through files, pulling out anything bearing the name Dubov Institute. Natalia spotted a locked cabinet near the back. It was different, newer, more secure. "I'll try it," she said. Her voice echoed. She used a thin metal pick from her pocket and began to work on the latch. Years of field reporting had taught her more than just how to write. Click. Twist. Click again. It opened. Inside were folders stamped top secret and ministry oversight. Classified. She scanned the first few pages. Contracts between the Dubov Institute and state-run pharmaceutical labs. Lists of drug trials on adolescents. Dosage notes. Consent waivers signed by state-appointed guardians, not parents. Her stomach turned. Alexei joined her, holding a thick file. "Look." Photos of patients. Black bars over their eyes. Notes describing behavior modification procedures. Electroconvulsive schedules. Isolated confinement logs. "We were test subjects," he whispered. "We weren't being helped. We were being studied." A heavy footstep echoed in the corridor. Natalia switched off her torch. Another step. Then a voice. Calm. Familiar. "Too slow," it said. "I warned her not to trust you." They froze. Yelena stepped into the doorway. Her face was bruised, one arm in a sling. Behind her, a tall man in a gray coat. No name tag. No expression. "You brought him?" Natalia hissed. "I had no choice," Yelena said. "They knew. They always knew." The man raised a pistol. "Not to shoot, to command." "Put the files down," he said. "Walk out. Forget this place." Alexei stood frozen. Natalia's mind raced. They could leave. Save their lives. Walk away and let the horror rot in silence. Or they could run. Yelena looked at Natalia, her eyes pleading. Then, just a flick of her hand, she tossed her handbag across the room. The man's eyes followed the motion. Alexei lunged. The torch beam flared back on, blinding light. Papers scattered. A shot rang out. The man collapsed, clutching his leg. Yelena screamed. Alexei pulled her back. Natalia grabbed the files and ran. They didn't stop until they reached the embankment. Their breath fogged the air. The river gleamed like liquid ice. They had the proof. But the ministry would know. Everything had changed. Natalia had always imagined that truth would feel like triumph. That uncovering a hidden horror would ignite something noble in the world. But now, with the files hidden beneath her floorboards and Yelena sleeping fitfully on her couch, she felt only dread. Every siren outside made her flinch. Alexei had vanished again, this time for good reason. He needed to erase any trace of their presence at Lubyanka. Burn their old clothes. Smash the burner phones. disappear. Yelena had been silent since their escape. Her injuries were worse than she had let on. 3 fractured ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and bruises that ran like ink down her spine. Still, she refused to go to a hospital. "They'll find me there," she whispered. "They always do." Natalia sat beside her that night, reading the documents line by line. Names, dates, coordinates of black sites, payments authorized by shell companies, photos of teenage boys strapped to beds, their eyes vacant. She cried for the first time in years. The next morning, she made her decision. "This isn't a story for print," she told Yelena. "This is something else." She called in an old favor from a contact at Radio Svoboda, a veteran broadcaster named Oleg, whose voice was as iconic as the Kremlin towers. They met in a quiet flat in Butursky, windows taped, phones left behind. Oleg read through the files, his hands shaking as he turned the pages. "Do you have any idea what you're holding?" he muttered. "I do," said Natalia. "And I know they'll kill us for it." He looked up at her. "Then we better do it live." It took 2 days to prepare. Yelena and Alexei stayed hidden while Natalia and Oleg worked through the night. No scripts. No edits. Just the raw, unfiltered truth. On Sunday evening, at exactly 9 p.m., Oleg opened the emergency frequency. A broadcast signal used only during national emergencies, and one they had hacked with help from an underground digital cell Alexei once belonged to. "This is Oleg Antonov," he began. "And if you are hearing this, you are no longer living in the country you thought you knew." Natalia followed, her voice steady. "We have uncovered classified records detailing the abuse and medical experimentation of Russian children by state institutions under the guise of mental health care. The names you will hear are real. The pain described is real. The silence ends now." For over 40 minutes, they read aloud. Descriptions of chemical sedation, of minors diagnosed with imaginary conditions to justify internment, of politicians who funded it, of doctors who covered it up. Halfway through the broadcast, the building's power cut out. But Alexei had expected that. A generator kicked in. The signal held. When they finished, Natalia looked at Oleg. "You think they'll come for us tonight? They're probably already outside." Yelena joined them by the window. The street was dark, too quiet. But then, something unexpected. Applause. From balconies. From windows across the buildings. Slow, hesitant claps that grew louder, joined by shouting voices, pans hitting rails, and car horns echoing down the street. They heard it, Yelena said, eyes wide. They actually heard it. Natalia felt something stir, something deeper than fear. Hope. But hope is fragile in Moscow. And across town, in a brightly lit conference room beneath the Ministry of Public Order, a red phone rang. The voice on the other end said only this: "Shut it down. All of it." By dawn, the broadcast had spread beyond their control. Recordings of the transmission were already circulating on Telegram, mirrored on servers in Iceland and Taiwan. Independent journalists from Riga, Vilnius, and even Tokyo were quoting segments word for word. The world had heard Moscow's secret. But inside Russia, silence fell like snow. State media denounced the broadcast as foreign propaganda. Roskomnadzor began systematically scrubbing every repost. Entire accounts vanished. Internet in several Moscow districts was throttled. Police checkpoints appeared overnight in Arbat, Tverskaya, and around major transport hubs. Natalia, Alexei, and Yelena huddled in the basement of an old shoe factory in Krasnoselsky. They had moved 3 times in 2 days. Paranoia hung thick in the air. "Why isn't anyone doing anything?" Yelena muttered. "They know now. They all know." Natalia wanted to say it was fear, but even she felt it, that cold, creeping silence that came not from ignorance, but from knowing exactly what was at stake. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps. A pause. 2 more. Alexei froze. "That's not our signal." He grabbed the pistol they'd taken from the clinic guard. Yelena pressed herself against the wall. But when the door opened, it wasn't a soldier. It was a boy, no older than 16. Thin, pale, wearing a gray beanie and a too-large coat. He held up a flash drive. My brother, he was in there. I saw the photos. You said his name. I have video. They let him in. The footage was grainy, shot on an old Nokia, but it showed enough. Guards dragging sedated teens into basement rooms. A doctor injecting something into a child's neck. Screams. Natalia sat back. This changes everything. They compiled the evidence and released it in parts, each clip embedded with metadata proving its source. The world media responded with fire. The BBC, Al Jazeera, Le Monde, all demanding a response from the Kremlin. But the Kremlin was no longer responding. It was retaliating. That night, Oleg's flat was raided. He was dragged from his home in front of neighbors. No warrant. No charges. Natalia knew then it was no longer about secrets. It was about survival. They needed to leave. Finland, Alexei said. We can cross through Karelia. I have contacts near Kostomuksha. But what about the others? Yelena asked. The families. The kids still inside. We'll come back, Natalia said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. We can't help anyone if we're dead. They packed light, burned documents, wiped devices, left no trace. But the city was watching. As they approached Belarusky station, Yelena tugged Natalia's sleeve. Behind us, she whispered. Third man in the coat. He's been following since the bridge. Natalia turned slightly. A man in a leather jacket, holding a newspaper upside down. They ducked into a stairwell. Alexei took the lead, pulling open a maintenance hatch that led down to the disused metro tunnel beneath the line. He's not alone, he said. Move now. They ran. Through dust and echoes. Past rats and old graffiti from the Soviet era. The tunnel led toward the northern district. Toward the edge. But with every step, Natalia knew the system was awakening. And Moscow doesn't forgive those who expose its scars. The tunnel's darkness swallowed their footsteps. Every breath felt louder, every heartbeat a drum in their ears. The air smelled of damp concrete and forgotten years. Alexei led, his flashlight beams slicing through the gloom. Natalia and Yelena followed close, clutching the flash drive and the battered satchel with their remaining evidence. Suddenly, the distant rumble of footsteps echoed behind them. More than one. They were not alone in the tunnels. Faster, Alexei whispered. They've sent pursuers. The maze of metro tunnels beneath Moscow was vast but not infinite. They took a sharp left at the old Krasnopresenskaya junction, hoping to lose whoever was trailing. But the footsteps multiplied. Voices in harsh Russian drifted closer. Stop. We know you're down there. Panic pressed against Natalia's chest like a vice. They reached a rusted ladder leading up to a manhole cover. Alexei pulled it open. Go. Now. One by one, they scrambled up into the freezing Moscow night, gasping as cold air hit their faces. They found themselves in a narrow alley behind a row of shuttered shops in the Arbat district. Neon lights flickered distantly, but no one was out. Where now? Yelena shivered. Safe houses, Alexei said. Friends. People still willing to fight. But Natalia's mind was elsewhere, on the children left behind, the families still trapped inside the clinic's horrors. We cannot run forever, she murmured. At some point, we must stand. Alexei nodded grimly. For now, their mission was survival. But the shadows that followed them promised this was far from over. The first light of dawn crept over the rooftops of Moscow, casting a pale glow on the snow-dusted streets. In a small, concealed apartment near the edge of the city, Natalia, Alexei, and Yelena gathered around a battered laptop. They had managed to contact an international human rights organization. The evidence they had smuggled out, the videos, the testimonies, were being prepared for release to the world. The hope was that global pressure might force change, even if it was slow and dangerous. But none of them expected what happened next. Suddenly, the door burst open. Armed men flooded the room. Yelena screamed, throwing herself at Natalia. Alexei pushed the laptop aside and grabbed a broken chair leg. The raid was swift but chaotic. Amid the struggle, Natalia saw a familiar face among the intruders. Oleg, gaunt and bloodied, his eyes hollow but defiant. They were dragged outside, bundled into a van. The city's cold wind bit at their skin as the van sped through the waking streets. But even in captivity, their spirits were unbroken. Natalia whispered to herself, "This is not the end. The world knows. The world will not forget." As the van disappeared into the Moscow dawn, a single message pinged on the laptop left behind. "Truth is louder than fear."